So among the strategy, the first one I'd like to present is simply the courts. Like, it's not because the government or the administration are generally not so inclined to adopt and see adopted Bitcoin that we don't have rules and fundamental rights that can protect anybody to be willing to use Bitcoin and so on. And there are principles that protect this use. For instance, the principle of privacy that's been that's written in different Declaration of Rights and constitutions, and also the rules on due process when administration are trying to forbid a particular type of business without having the ground to do so. There has been an example recently about this in Israel, where a company was refused to have a bank account by a bank, and they actually managed to have from the Supreme Court of Israel the right to open this bank account on the ground that the bank didn't prove that there was enough risk to justify that they would not allow the bank account. And so if they had no proof of that, they had no right to forbid this company to have a bank account. Same for the freedom of expression. So freedom of expression is maybe a bit old, but at the beginning of the cryptography space, that was an important ally in forbidding, avoiding the rules that, for instance, in the United States, you were not allowed as an academia to publish about cryptography and to travel abroad and explain cryptography, because it was considered as a weapon and it was under embargo as any weapon. And on the ground of freedom of expression, academia has succeeded in challenging these rules. And proof value also of decision. Also, there is another strategy is to gain the public debates and media. This is important because you remember I told you that politicians are sensitive to the trends and the movement in the public opinion. And I think that making reasonable arguments in the public media is really a key to change rules. One element that's easy to win is how much Bitcoin ensures integrity. So a lot of rules about the payments regulation are not so much applicable because the system ensures the integrity technically. Also, another argument that's a bit more recent is the liquidity, like the manipulation and so on of the Bitcoin was easier at the earlier stage, but nowadays we have elements to prove that it's becoming an asset more liquid. That's research from a professor at the University of Humboldt, and he's been measuring the liquidity of Bitcoin over the last years and months, and he's showing that definitely there is more and more liquidity in the Bitcoin space that ensure facilitate a fair markets. The partial transparency of Bitcoin also is an interesting element, and interoperability. Remember, I told you about the element of fair competition being a regulatory objective, and Bitcoin can definitely, and this is the argument, like be this layer of interoperability. Another strategy is regulatory arbitrage. So I'm sure I'm not making you discover that, but it is important to think that it's not only a way to just shop around and find the best regulation. It's also a good way to leverage on governments and showing them the different kind of option and regulation. And there is really an interest in not so much having heaven where it's just simple, but having flagship countries where the regulation is going to be more easy, and that where they're going to be a good economy growing out of that. Because for politicians in general, the key element is this ability to show that it was, in the end, positive for the economy. We have to be aware also that it's not a surprise that the rules are stricter in New York, in London, or in Berlin compared to Tech 7, because on the other side, the regulators also know the leverage they have. Like, places where you have a lot of users, where you have a more vivid ecosystem, they know that it's more interesting also for company to get there. So just the idea of like, we're gonna just move to the country where it's gonna be the easiest is not an end solution, because the key question is to be where, as a business, where your customers are. And the customers are definitely in places that are always gonna be a bit more heavily regulated, hence the interest in having a good strategy toward them. And then, of course, there is the strategy of full decentralization to embed some of the rules in the code, to self-regulation of the ecosystem, which implies definitely to have some political consensus of what are the rules that needs to be enforced by the community or by the code directly. Finally, I would like to finish on this. There is some compromise to be made and interest in having the link with the regulators is not just a question of rules versus the freedom of a business. As Bitcoin businesses, there is an interest also for having linked and help from law enforcement and regulators. A few examples I would like to point out is the problem of secret mining. So the lawsuit that's going on against Bitcoin.com that's using the brand Bitcoin and to attract people to another project. The market manipulation, of course, and a more glooming aspects I'm going to be investigating in the next month. That's about the patents that are getting deposited on this space, and where it might be dangerous in the end for certain projects and limit the creativity and so on. So this is it. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any question, I'd be happy to answer it, if I may.
I wonder if you have any comments on mining, because you talk a lot about like the regulations in regards of bitcoins, but mining, like for instance, I come from Quebec, and in Quebec there has been a moratorium for Bitcoin mining businesses, where they put they've changed the rates just for us, and they put it like 3 times more expensive. So do you have any comments maybe about like regulations and mining?
So I know less about mining, and I know more payment regulation, but so if you say, what was increased 3 times?
They've increased the rate for miners in Quebec. So they've, for instance, we have data centers, they have like a very special rate, and for miners, they took this rate and they multiply it by 3 times, just so like they say it's a dissuasive rate to like, I guess, to send us away.
Yeah, so that goes back to fundamental rights. For this is typically a problem of equality, and I would fight the hell out of them in those grounds. Like, yeah, those principles. It's not new that governments try to infringe and impose a certain vision of what activity should be okay or not. But unless it's really proven that an activity is dangerous, there is always the recourse there is always the possibility to try against this kind of behavior, if I understood correctly. Yes.
Hi, I would like to.
Hello.
I would like to know. Yesterday, the main speech was about privacy, and by the developer point of view, the privacy has to be a lot more. A layer that should be more intense on Bitcoin. But by regulatory point of view, the privacy is a mess with the AML and KYC regulation. How do you see the forecast in this issue?
Yeah, as I mentioned, anyway, even in the regular bank industry, there is no clear view on how that should be done because it's always conflicting. Like you need to know who is your customer, you need to report any apparent illegal activity, but at the same time, you need to protect the data. You protect from a breach, but also even protect from the government. Like most rules for privacy have been designed against the governments and their tendency to infringe on citizens' privacy. So there is a need of privacy in payment services, and there is a need of more privacy on using Bitcoin at the moment because there is no meaningful way to use it if your transactions are just in the open. And how it should be combined, one first aspect of concretely on what's going to happen in the next month is that anyway, the privacy enhancements are quite distinct from the core protocol. So it's not going to forbid the Bitcoin to flourish. And on the other side, there are going to be some people using privacy systems. And as I mentioned, there are going to be court cases that are going to try to solve like what kind of responsibility you take when you're using this kind of privacy. But there should be a reasonable solution found where we can ensure to be able to tackle the problem of money laundering while keeping the user privacy. More further in the future, I think that what's going to win in the end is to have well-designed systems that are going to embed this requirement in a way. So to have privacy system that, I don't know, and work until a certain kind of amount, but if you try to go above this kind of amount, you have to use another kind of privacy system where somebody can watch and actually control what's happening. I don't have the perfect design for this yet, but I'm sure we're going to see some solution in that sense in the future. Yep. Oh, sorry.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Is it me? Yeah. I'm just wondering if you could expand a little bit on the regulatory capture topic. So Bitcoin is a permissionless decentralized protocol, so it's not going around capturing regulators. There are other shitcoins, prominent ones that have CEOs and cult leaders that do seem to be very effective at capturing regulators. Just wondering if you think that might have an impact on Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's actually what was the point of me saying that. It's actually an important danger that more commercial coins have more the ability to fund the lobbying activities and be able to reach to regulators. I honestly, so this is more a sentiment, but for every regulators I've met and politician and so on, I think that we've gone above the initial fear of Bitcoin and now they are all like curious of the space, and also we have gone beyond the just blockchain noise. Like they have realized that this is something. I don't think they take any position on which cryptocurrency should be used and which one is going to lead and so on, and they don't have any preference. And even in France, that has been really adverse to Bitcoin. So I know not everybody will agree with me, but I feel like the sulfurous image of the beginning is fading away. So even if Bitcoin don't have the mean to do any lobbying, it's going to be never treated less fairly, I guess, than the other. So that's why also I was mentioning the ability to sometimes decide when it's strategic to think as a global ecosystem of cryptocurrencies, and when, on the contrary, there should be a point made of like, this works differently, this is not the same point. You've seen the decision of the Securities Exchange Commission a few months ago that, so it was trying to assess whether some coins were a security or not, and made the clear view that Bitcoin would not be considered a security because it definitely worked in a really fully decentralized way, which was not the case of most other cryptocurrencies. So the view is the noise is being settled down, and I think the interesting quality of Bitcoin in a really fair way are being exposed, and there is enough advocates. For instance, for what I know in France, like you have prominent actors of Bitcoin that are able also to reach and so they might not be as organized, but it's like an open source project. It's like it's been 20 years I've been interested in open source project, and there is this part of responsibility that everybody in the ecosystem takes, and that makes it work in the end. Not as strongly, obviously, not with enough means sometimes, but for this point, I think it's not a problem. Yep.
Hi, Xavier. Thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. I'm curious, under the section that you said challenges of regulators, and you said institutional competition. Then you gave an example of the 13 or so French commissions on the subject. 3 questions here. How do the institutions compete with one another? What's their incentive? Why are they doing that and fighting one another? And then do you have a real life example of that in action? Well,
I'm seeing what's happening in France at the moment in this space, and it's really funny. They have each institution has different strategy and objective. But at some point I was saying that if you were in the like any institution working on financial aspect and you were not regulating cryptocurrencies, you were looking dumb. Like you had to say something and act on something. And so yeah. At the moment, it's been in France a lot of each authority trying to make a position and also going stronger and stronger, each of them by reinforced by the other one. Like the first 2 years ago, declarations were really timid and so on, and the more they gain confidence that others are doing kind of the same, that goes above. So yeah. Yep.
Hi. Yeah, thanks a lot for the presentation. And I tend to think that all the rest of the presentations are very funny for people who love technology, but the real fight in the long term is this one. Because I think that the core proposition of Bitcoin just undermines a lot of the current status. So it's difficult for me to see the question, which countries do you see are taking healthy steps to get Bitcoin in the economy, and can you give some examples? Because in the long term, I just see disruptions. I don't see how Bitcoin can fit in the current financial system. I don't know if
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a good question. My impression is that most countries at the moment, I don't know every country and I haven't met most of them, but my impression is generally the idea is to let go. So what's going to be critical is the mass adoption, and the mass adoption is not going to be decided by the regulators. And currently, what's stopping people from using Bitcoin is mostly to understand how to use a wallet, to understand how they buy. Like every one of us meet like 80% of my friends are interested into it, but like 2% of them own any Bitcoin. So, and I think for everybody here, it's this kind of proportion. So that's the main problem. So maybe this is first, and then they're gonna decide what's gonna happen. The sane position for any government and the right way to do it at the moment would be to just do nothing, because if people want to use Bitcoin to pay, it's fine. And for instance, in France, like there are now several businesses that accept Bitcoin, and it's been clarified by the tax administration how it should be dealt with, and so it's like becoming something really really lambda. So now the other fight is the mass adoption, and that's going to be another key too.
Yeah, my question is somehow probably connected with your question. Have you ever thought about ignoring the regulator, letting the open market decide what the rules should be, and just let it bloom from bottom to the top? But what you're dealing with is that you're trying to impose some rules and construct them the way that the laws should do something or whatever. I mean, like I said yesterday, I'm an anarchist, so I don't see the government to be involved into this crypto infrastructure. So, I mean, just ignore it, let them lag behind, let them whatever, collapse or whatever, do what they want. Let's leave the open market develop parallel,
I see. What I try to explain today is that on one side there are some legitimate questions to be raised, like money laundering is not good for any economy, and then it could be a specialist debate, like is it a good way to regulate to avoid the illegal activity? But if we consider that illegal activity are bad, we should have some money laundering because it's the best way to tackle the benefits of this illegal activity, like selling drugs and so on. So that's one side of thing. But the second one that I mentioned, and that's more problematic, is there is an interest of governments anyway to get hold on what's happening in the Bitcoin space, because just that how their incentive is structured to show that they control this ecosystem. And there, I might join you. Like maybe it would be more healthy to just do nothing and let it be. But on one side, we have to acknowledge that there are some elements that make sense to have some control and trying to find the right balance between privacy and illegal activity. But yeah. Thank you.